In the great kingdom of Adoni, where the sun painted the red earth gold each morning and the baobab trees stood like ancient guardians, there lived a king named Samuel who ruled with wisdom and kindness. His palace sat atop the highest hill, its white walls gleaming like polished ivory, surrounded by gardens where peacocks strutted and fountains sang their eternal songs. King Samuel had been blessed with a daughter named Grace, whose beauty was matched only by her gentle heart and quick mind. Grace had inherited her mother's luminous dark skin and her father's strong spirit. When Queen Mary died giving birth to Grace, the entire kingdom mourned, for she had been beloved by all. King Samuel raised Grace with tender care, teaching her the ways of leadership, justice, and compassion. Grace grew into a young woman of 17 summers, known throughout the kingdom for her wisdom beyond her years. She would sit in the palace courtyard each morning, listening to the troubles of the common people and offering counsel. The merchants spoke of her fairness, the farmers praised her understanding of their hardships, and the children adored her gentle nature. But happiness in the palace was not destined to last forever. 3 years after Queen Mary's death, King Samuel married again. His new wife, Helena, came from a distant kingdom across the great river. She arrived with great fanfare, accompanied by her daughter Victoria, a girl of Grace's age with sharp features and sharper ambitions. Helena was beautiful in a cold way, like moonlight on water, and she spoke with honeyed words that masked a heart of stone. At first, Helena treated Grace with apparent kindness, but her true nature soon revealed itself. She was jealous of the love the people bore for Grace and fearful that the princess would always overshadow her own daughter Victoria. Helena began to plant seeds of doubt in King Samuel's mind, speaking in whispers during the quiet hours of night. "My dear husband," Helena would say, her voice soft as silk but deadly as a serpent's bite, "have you noticed how the people look at Grace? They see her as their true ruler, not you. She holds court in the mornings, making decisions that should be yours alone. Is this not a threat to your authority?" King Samuel, weary from the burdens of rule and blinded by his new love, began to listen to these poisonous words. Helena was clever, never speaking outright lies, but twisting truth until they became dangerous distortions. Grace noticed the change in her father's demeanor. Where once his eyes had sparkled with pride when he looked upon her, now they held questions and doubt. Her heart ached, but she continued her duties, believing that love and truth would eventually prevail. Helena's campaign against Grace grew bolder. She began to stage elaborate deceptions. One morning, she secretly gave gold coins to a merchant, instructing him to claim that Princess Grace had demanded them as a bribe for favorable treatment in the market disputes. When the merchant appeared before King Samuel with this false testimony, Helena stood by his side, her face a mask of sorrowful concern. "I am pained to bring this to light, my dear husband," Helena said, her hand resting dramatically on her heart. "But we cannot ignore such grave accusations against the princess." Grace stood before her father's throne, her head held high despite the shock and hurt that coursed through her veins like ice water. "Father, I have never taken so much as a grain of rice that was not rightfully mine. This merchant lies." But the merchant, his pockets heavy with Helena's gold, maintained his false story. Other merchants, frightened or bribed by Helena's agents, came forward with similar fabricated tales. The carefully constructed web of lies grew stronger with each passing day. King Samuel's heart was torn. Part of him knew his daughter's true character, but Helena's whispers had poisoned his judgment, and the mounting evidence seemed overwhelming. The final blow came when Helena presented a forged letter, supposedly written by Grace to a neighboring kingdom, offering to sell military secrets in exchange for support for her claim to the throne. "See how she plots against you, my beloved," Helena whispered to the king as he held the false letter with trembling hands. "She seeks to overthrow you and take the crown for herself." Grace read the letter with growing horror. The handwriting was skillfully copied, but the words were not hers. "Father, I would never betray you or our kingdom. This letter is false. I love you and our people too much to ever consider such treachery." But Helena had prepared for this denial. She produced witnesses, more merchants and servants bought with gold and threads, who swore they had seen Grace meeting with foreign ambassadors in secret. The web of deception was complete, and King Samuel's heart, already weakened by grief and manipulated by love, finally broke under the weight of apparent betrayal. With tears streaming down his weathered face, King Samuel made the most painful decision of his life. Standing before his assembled court, with the setting sun casting long shadows across the throne room, he spoke the words that would shatter his daughter's world. "Princess Grace," his voice cracked like breaking stone, "you have betrayed the trust of your king and father. You have sold the secrets of our kingdom and conspired against the crown. I hereby strip you of your title and royal privileges. You are no longer my heir, and you are no longer a princess of this realm." The court gasped in collective shock. Grace felt the world spinning around her, the marble floor seeming to rise up to meet her as her knees buckled. But she did not fall. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and looked directly into her father's eyes. "Father, I accept your judgment, though it breaks my heart to know you believe these lies. But I will not leave the palace, for this is my home and these are my people. If I cannot serve as a princess, I will serve as a servant, but I will serve." Helena had expected Grace to flee in shame, perhaps to seek refuge in a distant land where she could cause no more trouble. This declaration of intent to remain caught the stepmother off guard, but she quickly saw opportunity in it. What better way to completely destroy Grace's spirit than to force the former princess to work as a common servant in her own home? "So be it," Helena said, her voice dripping with false magnanimity. "Let Grace learn humility through honest work. She may remain as a servant in the kitchens." And so began Grace's darkest chapter. The girl who had once worn silk gowns and golden jewelry now dressed in coarse brown cloth and went barefoot on the cold stone floors. Her soft hands, which had once held scrolls of law and treaties, now scrubbed pots and swept floors. Her room, which had been filled with books and beautiful tapestries, was now a small chamber in the servants' quarters with only a thin mat for a bed and a single small window that looked out upon the garbage heap. The other servants, confused and frightened by this sudden change, initially kept their distance from Grace. Some had loved her as their princess and were heartbroken to see her fall so far. Others, fearing Helena's wrath, treated the former princess with the cold indifference reserved for the lowest servants. But Grace bore her humiliation with dignity that astounded all who witnessed it. She performed her duties without complaint, waking before dawn to light the fires and prepare the morning meals. She swept the great halls where she had once walked as royalty, scrubbed the steps she had once descended in royal procession, and served meals to guests who had once bowed in her presence. Helena watched Grace's every move, waiting for signs of rebellion or attempts to reclaim her former position. But Grace gave her no satisfaction. The former princess worked diligently, spoke little, and maintained her composure even under the most trying circumstances. Victoria, Helena's daughter, took particular pleasure in Grace's downfall. She would order Grace around with cruel delight, assigning her the most degrading tasks and watching with satisfaction as the former princess carried them out without protest. "Clean my shoes," Victoria would command, throwing her muddy sandals at Grace's feet. "And make sure they shine like mirrors. I want to see my reflection in them." Grace would take the shoes without a word and clean them until they gleamed, returning them with a small bow that contained no trace of bitterness or sarcasm, only quiet dignity. As months passed, something remarkable began to happen. The servants who had initially feared associating with Grace began to witness her true character. They saw how she shared her meager food portions with those who had even less. They watched her tend to sick servants with the same gentle care she had once shown to visiting dignitaries. They observed how she never spoke ill of those who had wronged her, never complained about her fate, and never let bitterness poison her heart. Martha, an elderly cook who had served the palace for 30 years, was the first to break the barrier of fear and reach out to Grace. She had known Grace since childhood and could not bear to see the girl suffer alone. "Child," Martha whispered one evening as they cleaned the great kitchen after a royal feast, "Your heart remains as pure as mountain spring water. How do you bear this injustice without anger consuming you?" Grace paused in her scrubbing and looked up at the old woman with eyes that held depth of wisdom that seemed impossible for her young age. "Martha, anger is like holding a burning coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. I choose to hold cool water instead, so that I might soothe rather than harm." Martha nodded, understanding that she was in the presence of true nobility, not the nobility of birth or title, but the nobility of character that no decree could strip away. Word of Grace's wisdom and kindness began to spread among the servants. They came to her with their troubles, seeking the counsel that had once been available to all the kingdom's people. Grace listened with the same attention she had given to matters of state, offering guidance that was both practical and compassionate. When young Thomas, a stable boy, fell ill with fever, Grace tended to him through long nights, bringing him water and cool cloths for his burning forehead. When Sarah, a kitchen maid, received news that her mother in the countryside was dying, Grace secretly gave her own savings, the few coins she had managed to earn through extra work, so Sarah could make the journey home. These acts of kindness did not go unnoticed by the common people of the kingdom, who still remembered their beloved princess. Merchants who came to the palace began to ask about Grace, wondering why she was no longer seen in the morning court sessions. When they learned of her fate, many were outraged, but Grace's message to them was always the same: serve the kingdom with loyalty, respect the king's decisions, and never let injustice turn your hearts to stone. Meanwhile, Helena's influence over King Samuel continued to grow. She convinced him to make Victoria his heir, arguing that she was more suited to rule than Grace had ever been. Victoria was appointed to take over the morning court sessions, but she lacked Grace's wisdom and compassion. Her judgments were harsh and often unfair, favoring those who brought her gifts and showing little mercy to the poor and desperate. The kingdom began to suffer under Victoria's harsh judgments and Helena's greedy policies. Taxes increased to fund Helena's lavish lifestyle, and the people's complaints were dismissed with cold indifference. The merchants spoke in hushed tones about the golden days when Princess Grace had ensured fair treatment for all. The farmers struggled under new regulations that favored Helena's cronies over those who actually worked the land. But Grace, working in the depths of the palace, remained unaware of these larger troubles. Her world had shrunk to the kitchens, the servants' quarters, and the endless round of menial tasks that filled her days from sunrise to sunset. 2 years passed in this manner. Grace's 18th birthday came and went unmarked by celebration, just another day of hard work and quiet dignity. She had grown thinner from the poor food and constant labor, but her spirit remained unbroken. If anything, her trials had refined her character like gold tested in fire, burning away any trace of pride or selfishness and leaving behind pure compassion and wisdom. The turning point came during the Festival of Abundance, the kingdom's greatest annual celebration. It was a time when people from all corners of the realm came to the capital city to trade, celebrate, and seek audience with the royal family. The palace would be filled with guests, requiring all servants to work day and night to accommodate the crowds. Helena had planned the most elaborate festival in the kingdom's history, partly to showcase her own power and partly to demonstrate Victoria's worthiness as heir to the throne. Foreign dignitaries, wealthy merchants, and nobles from distant lands would all attend the grand celebration. Grace worked harder than ever during the festival preparations. She was assigned to serve in the Great Hall during the formal dinners, a task that would bring her face to face with people who had once known her as a princess. Helena had chosen this assignment deliberately, hoping to cause Grace maximum humiliation and perhaps finally break her spirit. On the first night of the festival, Grace entered the Great Hall carrying platters of food for the honored guests. She wore the same brown servant's dress, her hair hidden beneath a simple white head covering, her feet bare as befitted her lowly station. Many of the guests did not recognize her in her humble garb, but some sharp-eyed visitors began to whisper among themselves. "Is that not Princess Grace?" whispered Lord Edmund, a nobleman from a neighboring kingdom who had once negotiated treaties with her. Impossible, replied his companion. Princess Grace was disgraced and stripped of her title. This must be some servant who bears a resemblance. But Lord Edmund was not convinced. He had dealt with Grace on several occasions and remembered her intelligence and grace. As he watched the servant move through the hall with quiet dignity, he became more certain of his identification. Grace served the meal without incident, but as she was clearing plates from the high table where her father sat with Helena and Victoria, disaster struck. Victoria, perhaps seeking to create a scene for the entertainment of the guest, deliberately knocked over a goblet of wine, sending the red liquid cascading across the white tablecloth and onto her expensive gown. "You clumsy fool!" Victoria shrieked, leaping to her feet and pointing an accusing finger at Grace. "Look what you've done to my dress. This gown cost more than you could earn in 10 years. All conversation in the great hall ceased as every eye turned to the confrontation. Grace stood perfectly still, holding the empty platter, her face calm despite the false accusation. She had not been anywhere near the goblet when Victoria knocked it over, and several guests had witnessed Victoria's deliberate action. "I apologize, my lady," Grace said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the silent hall. "Allow me to help clean the spill." "Clean it." Victoria's voice rose to a near shriek. "You've ruined my gown. Father, surely this servant must be punished for her clumsiness." Helena rose from her seat, her eyes glittering with malicious pleasure. This was the moment she had orchestrated, the final humiliation that would surely break Grace's spirit before all these important witnesses. "Guards," Helena commanded, "seize this clumsy servant. She will be whipped in the courtyard as punishment for her carelessness and as a lesson to other servants." A horrified murmur ran through the assembled guests. Even in kingdoms where servants were not treated kindly, public whipping for an accident seemed excessive, especially when many had clearly seen Victoria's deliberate action. But it was Lord Edmund who stood up, his voice ringing with authority. "Your Majesty," he addressed King Samuel directly, "I cannot stand by and watch this injustice. That servant did not cause the spill. I saw clearly that your stepdaughter knocked over the goblet herself." Other guests began to nod in agreement, and voices rose in support of Lord Edmund's testimony. Helena's face flushed with anger at having her plan exposed, while Victoria looked around nervously as she realized her deception had been witnessed by many. King Samuel looked confused and troubled. The wine and rich food had clouded his judgment somewhat, but he could see that his guests were disturbed by the scene unfolding before them. More importantly, there was something about the servant girl that tugged at his heart in a way he couldn't understand. "Bring the servant closer," King Samuel commanded, his voice heavy with an emotion he couldn't name. Grace stepped forward, still carrying the platter, her head held high despite her humble circumstances. As she approached the throne, the light from the great chandelier fell fully upon her face for the first time that evening. King Samuel's breath caught in his throat. Even dressed as a servant, even thin from poor food and hard work, Grace's features were unmistakably familiar. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile, the way she carried herself with quiet dignity, all of it rushed back to him in a flood of memory. "Remove your head covering," the king whispered, his hands gripping the arms of his throne. Grace hesitated for just a moment, then reached up and pulled away the white cloth that had hidden her hair. The thick, dark curls that had once been adorned with golden ornaments fell freely around her shoulders, and gasps of recognition echoed throughout the hall. "Grace," King Samuel breathed, rising from his throne as if pulled by invisible strings. "My daughter. My Grace." The hall erupted in whispers and exclamations as the truth spread through the crowd like wildfire. The disgraced princess, living as a servant in her own palace. The former heir to the throne, reduced to clearing tables and scrubbing floors. Helena's face had gone white as bone, while Victoria cowered behind her mother's skirts. They both realized that their carefully constructed web of lies was about to unravel completely. But Grace's reaction was what truly amazed everyone present. She did not throw herself at her father's feet begging for forgiveness or restoration. She did not point accusing fingers at Helena and Victoria. Instead, she curtsied deeply, with the same respect she would have shown to any monarch, and spoke in a clear, steady voice. Your Majesty does me great honor by remembering my name. I am but a servant in your palace, grateful for the opportunity to serve the kingdom I love. These words, spoken with such dignity and lack of bitterness, struck King Samuel like lightning. In that moment, he realized the terrible mistake he had made. This was not the behavior of a traitor or conspirator. This was the response of someone whose love for kingdom and family remained pure despite suffering terrible injustice. No, King Samuel said, his voice breaking as tears began to flow down his cheeks. You are not a servant. You are my daughter, my beloved Grace, and I have wronged you beyond measure. He descended from his throne and approached Grace, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch her face. Forgive me, my child. I allowed poison to enter my heart and turn me against my own blood. I believed lies when I should have trusted the truth I knew in my soul. The great hall watched in fascinated silence as father and daughter faced each other after 2 years of separation and suffering. Grace's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. Father, there is nothing to forgive. A daughter's love does not die because of misunderstanding. A daughter's loyalty does not waver because of hard times. I have never stopped loving you, and I have never stopped serving our kingdom, even as a servant. These words broke the last of King Samuel's resistance to the truth. He pulled Grace into his arms, embracing her tightly while tears of regret and joy flowed freely. Tell me, he whispered urgently, tell me how I was deceived. Help me understand how I came to believe such terrible lies about you. But before Grace could answer, Lord Edmund stepped forward again. Throughout the emotional reunion, he had been watching Helena and Victoria, and he had seen something that others had missed. Helena was slowly backing toward a side entrance, clearly planning to escape before her lies were exposed. Your Majesty, Lord Edmund called out, before we hear explanations, perhaps we should ensure that all parties remain present for the truth-telling. King Samuel followed Lord Edmund's gaze and saw Helena's attempted retreat. His eyes hardened as understanding began to dawn. Guards, the king commanded, his voice now carrying the full authority of his position, see that no one leaves this hall until we have heard the complete truth. Helena was forced to return to her place, her face a mask of defiant fear. Victoria clung to her mother's arm, all her earlier arrogance replaced by terror. And so, before the assembled nobles and dignitaries of many kingdoms, the truth finally emerged. Grace, with characteristic fairness, told her story without embellishment or dramatization. She spoke of the forged letters, the bribed witnesses, the carefully constructed web of deceptions that had led to her downfall. She spoke without hatred or desire for revenge, simply presenting the facts as she understood them. Other witnesses came forward to support her account. Servants who had been too frightened to speak before now found courage in numbers. Merchants who had been forced to lie now recanted their false testimony. The stable master remembered seeing Victoria's maid take one of Grace's dresses, which had later been used as evidence of secret meetings with foreign agents. As each lie was exposed and each deception revealed, Helena's composure crumbled. Finally, faced with overwhelming evidence and the condemning stares of the assembled crowd, she broke down and confessed the full extent of her schemes. Yes, she screamed, her carefully maintained facade of righteousness finally shattering completely. Yes, I arranged it all. Grace was too perfect, too beloved. She would have been a better ruler than my Victoria, and I couldn't allow that. I did what any mother would do, I protected my child's future. The hall erupted in shocked acclamations at this admission. Even Victoria looked horrified by her mother's public confession, realizing for the first time the full extent of the evil that had been done in her name. King Samuel's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, grief, and finally a terrible resolve. He looked at Helena with the cold judgment of a monarch who had been gravely wronged. You poisoned my mind against my own daughter, he said, his voice deadly quiet. You stole 2 years of her life, forced her to live as a servant in her own home, and nearly destroyed the bond between father and child. What punishment could possibly fit such crimes? But before the king could pronounce judgment, Grace stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on her father's arm. Father, may I speak? King Samuel nodded, though his anger still burned hot in his eyes. Grace turned to face Helena and Victoria, and her next words surprised everyone in the hall. Helena, you acted from fear and love for your daughter. I understand that motivation, even though I cannot condone your methods. Victoria, you were young and influenced by your mother's ambitions. I do not seek revenge against either of you. The hall buzzed with amazement at Grace's merciful words, but she was not finished. However, justice must be served, not for revenge, but to restore order and prevent such deceptions from happening again. Father, I suggest that Helena and Victoria be given the opportunity to learn the value of honest work, just as I have learned it. Let them serve in the kitchens and cleaning rooms for 1 year, earning their food and shelter through their labor. After that time, let them be free to leave the kingdom and make new lives elsewhere, wiser for their experiences. This suggestion of merciful justice rather than harsh revenge showed Grace's character in its truest light. She had the power to demand severe punishments for those who had wronged her, but instead she chose forgiveness tempered with appropriate consequences. King Samuel looked at his daughter with awe and pride. Your mercy honors both our family and our kingdom, Grace. Let it be as you have suggested. Helena and Victoria were led away to begin their year of service, both of them stunned by Grace's unexpected mercy. Helena, in particular, seemed broken by the realization that her victim had proven to be far more noble than she had ever been. But the evening's revelations were not yet complete. As Grace stood before the assembled crowd in her servant's dress, King Samuel realized that a public restoration was necessary to undo the damage that had been done. Lords and ladies, honored guests, people of my kingdom, King Samuel announced in a voice that carried to every corner of the great hall, 2 years ago I made a terrible error in judgment. I allowed lies to poison my heart against my own daughter, the rightful heir to this throne. Tonight, before all of you as witnesses, I restore Princess Grace to her full titles and privileges. She is once again my daughter, my heir, and your future queen. The hall erupted in cheers and applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the palace. But King Samuel raised his hand for silence, as he had more to say. Moreover, I declare that Princess Grace has proven herself worthy of the crown in ways that formal training never could have achieved. She has learned to serve before seeking to rule, to show mercy in the face of injustice, and to maintain her integrity under the most trying circumstances. She is not only restored to her position, she is elevated by the wisdom and strength she has gained through her trials. Over the days that followed the festival, the kingdom celebrated Grace's return with joy that seemed to touch every corner of the realm. The servants who had witnessed her kindness and dignity spread word of her character throughout the land. The common people, who had suffered under Victoria's harsh judgments, rejoiced to know that their beloved princess would once again serve as their advocate and protector. Grace herself took up her royal duties with renewed wisdom and compassion. Her experiences as a servant had given her insights into the lives of common people that no princess raised in luxury could have gained. She understood their struggles, their fears, and their hopes in ways that made her a more effective and beloved leader. The morning court sessions resumed, but now they were enhanced by Grace's deeper understanding of justice and mercy. She could identify with the struggles of the poor because she had been poor. She could understand the dignity of honest work because she had performed such work herself. She could show mercy to those who made mistakes because she had experienced both the pain of false accusation and the healing power of forgiveness. Martha, the old cook who had befriended Grace during her darkest days, was invited to become the royal housekeeper, a position of honor and respect. The other servants who had shown kindness to Grace in her time of need were similarly rewarded, not with gold or titles, but with the knowledge that their compassion had been witnessed and valued by royalty. As for Grace herself, she kept her old servant's dress hanging in her royal chambers as a reminder of the lessons she had learned. She would often tell visitors that those 2 years of hardship and humility had been worth more than any formal education in statecraft. I learned that true nobility comes not from birth or title, but from character, she would say. I discovered that service is not beneath royalty, it is the very foundation of righteous rule. Most importantly, I found that maintaining dignity and kindness in the face of injustice is the greatest victory anyone can achieve. The kingdom prospered under Grace's wise counsel and her father's renewed dedication to just rule. The people spoke often of their princess who had been a servant and their servant who had proven herself a true princess. Her story became a teaching tale told throughout the land, reminding all who heard it that true worth cannot be stolen by lies or diminished by circumstance. Years later, when Grace finally inherited the throne, she ruled with a wisdom born of both privilege and hardship, of both power and powerlessness. She never forgot the lessons learned while scrubbing floors and serving meals, and her kingdom became known throughout the region as a place where justice was tempered with mercy and where the lowlier citizen could find a fair hearing from their queen. And in the palace kitchens, where Grace had spent her darkest days, a small plaque was installed that read, "Here worked Princess Grace, who learned that the greatest service is done not from above, but from beside those we seek to help." The story of Grace's trials and restoration spread far beyond her kingdom's borders, carried by the merchants and diplomats who had witnessed her transformation from servant back to princess. It became a tale told to children about the power of maintaining one's integrity in the face of adversity, and to adults about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to recognize true worth. And Grace herself, now Queen Grace, would sometimes walk through those same kitchen corridors late at night, remembering the girl who had refused to let bitterness poison her heart, who had chosen service over self-pity, and who had discovered that sometimes the greatest crown a person can wear is invisible to the eye but visible to the heart, the crown of unshakable character forged in the fires of adversity and polished bright by the choice to love rather than hate. For in the end, Grace had learned the most important lesson of all, that no one can truly diminish you without your permission, and that the greatest victory is not in avoiding hardship, but in emerging from it with your soul intact and your capacity for love undiminished. This was the story that lived on long after Grace's reign had ended, a reminder to all who heard it that true royalty lies not in what others call you, but in who you choose to be when no one is watching, when life is hardest, and when the choice between bitterness and grace hangs in the balance like morning mist waiting to be burned away by the rising sun.